Okay, Verfremdung is probably the most famous, stroke notorious, of Brecht's theoretical notions, and its precise meaning has provoked considerable academic disagreement. The translation of Verfremdung also raises controversial issues, not only in relation to rendering Brecht's writings into English, but also in more fundamental terms. And the more fundamental issue is the very general question, to what degree should the translation of theoretical concepts be informed by interpretative and intertextual considerations? And I'll be thinking about that here in relation to Verfremdung, but also in the comments I make in a few minutes on the short order one. Okay, as I'm sure you're aware, for many years the standard translation of Verfremdung was alienation. And this gave rise to two fundamental misunderstandings of Brecht. The first was that Brechtian theatre was somehow cold and impersonal because he wanted his productions to alienate the audience. Well, he didn't. He wanted them to have fun, and arguably Brecht is the greatest comic dramatist writing in German. By the 1930s, Brecht was a committed Marxist, and so it's sometimes been assumed that alienation in Brecht is analogous to alienation in Marx. This parallel seems to be even stronger in view of the fact that before he introduces the term Verfremdung in the mid-1930s, he uses the term Entfremdung. Examples of this are in the major stroke minor pedagogy, which is printed in Brecht on Art and Politics from around about 1930, in the classic essay Theatre for Pleasure, Theatre for Instruction from 1936, and even in Benjamin's essay on Brecht, the author has produced from 1934. And Brecht uses Entfremdung initially, and of course Entfremdung is the term that Marx uses to designate alienation. However, the problem here is that Entfremdung in Marx refers to the socio-economic position of the worker in the labour process under capitalism, whereas Ent or Verfremdung in Brecht refers to an aesthetic process that renews our powers of cognition. And I think it's much easier to grasp what Brecht means by Verfremdung if we translate it or render it as making strange or estrangement. That's the core idea. Nevertheless, in the course of the 1970s and 80s, two further candidates presented themselves in the contest to translate Verfremdung, namely defamiliarisation and distanciation, or the distancing effect. To give you a recent quote, one complication of staging Brecht's work is how to handle his famous Verfremdungseffect or distancing technique at Sarah Hemmings in the FT 2013 in the context of the Galileo production in Stratford. This has led to misunderstandings similar to those we encountered with alienation. Brecht may not have actually wanted his productions to put the audience off, but he still wanted to distance the audience from the proceedings on stage. Now, it is of course true that Brecht does not want the spectator to identify with the characters on stage, but generally speaking, he uses the term distance to characterise the actors' relationship to their roles, and the metaphor of decentering to clarify the spectator's relationship to the events on stage. And the classic stage of that position is in the epic theatre model in the Notes to Mahagoni. And in fact, to take the argument one stage further, distanciation in fact renders the French mistranslation of Verfremdung as distanciation, which became fashionable in the 1980s thanks to the impact of structuralism and post-structuralism. Let's think about defamiliarisation. Defamiliarisation has much stronger credentials, not least as Verfremdung is the standard German translation of the Russian formalist term ostranение, and ostranение is typically rendered into English as defamiliarisation. Also, in the short organon for the theatre, Brecht refers to modern Verfremdung effects as, quote, removing the stamp of familiarity, end of quote. But for Victor Shklovsky, who was the key theorist of defamiliarisation, for Shklovsky, defamiliarisation is an artistic technique designed to intensify our sensations and perceptions of objects in a world where authentic vision has been deadened by abstraction, so that we never see beyond the surface of reality. his concept of defamiliarisation is also grounded in a vitalistic critique of modern culture. For Brecht, on the other hand, ultimately the aim of Verfremdung is that we should understand the world better. It enables the spectators to perceive things in a new way so that the social rules governing our actions can be revealed. So we as spectators can see that events could have turned out differently. The classic example, our tool is rise is resistible. In other words, the Verfremdung for Brecht reboots our cognitive apparatus and is grounded not in vitalism, but in a Marxist critique of ideology. But rendering Verfremdung as defamiliarisation could imply an equivalence between Szlowski's Ostranenie and Brecht's Verfremdung, which I think would be conceptually misleading. And to add one final twist to this tortuous tale, I got this from one of the research students at Nottingham, just finished his PhD on Brecht in the Soviet Union. In the Soviet Union in the late 1950s, Verfremdung was translated not as Ostranenie, as one might have expected, but by the Russian word for Entfremdung in Marx. This, of course, is because Soviet cultural theory was radically anti-formalist. But I found that very amusing. Okay, having been drawn into, and I've drawn you into this as well, having been drawn into this maelstrom of theoretical subtleties, we found ourselves in a similar position to that of the narrator in E.T.A. Hoffmann's The Sandman. In that story, the narrator introduces himself to us about a third of the way into the story, after a series of letters. He introduces himself to us by trying out various ways of beginning a story, but then, finding them all wanting, he decides not to have a beginning at all. We too threw in the conceptual towel and decided not to translate Verfremdung, if at all possible. So wherever we can, we've left it in German in italics, otherwise we've used sort of circumlocutions based on the sense of estrangement and making strange.